They say debt has no expiration date in the galaxy. That honor transcends species, time, and the slow decay of aging bodies. My name is Colonel James Ironside Morrison, retired. I'm 73 years old, don't work right anymore. My hands shake when I try to hold a cup of coffee. I take 17 different medications just to get through the day without pain. By any reasonable measure, I should be sitting in a retirement home on Earth, playing cards and boring the nursing staff with war stories. Instead, I'm standing in the cargo bay of a stolen freighter, watching my homeworld shrink in the viewport, surrounded by 6 other old bastards who should know better. We're heading toward a war zone that military command has already written off as lost. We have outdated weapons, aging bodies, and approximately 0 chance of success. And we're doing it because 20 years ago, a 10-year-old alien girl named Sera threw herself in front of an assassin's bullet meant for me. She was just a kid, a refugee from a species humanity barely understood, living in the slums of New Chicago because her family had nowhere else to go. She had no reason to save me, no reason to care if one more human soldier lived or died, but she did it anyway, and that single act of courage changed everything. Now her homeworld is burning. The Kresh Hegemony, the same genocidal empire her family fled from all those years ago, has finally found the Veran colony worlds. They're not interested in conquest. They're interested in extinction. Every Veran they find, they kill. Men, women, children. It doesn't matter. The Kresh believe the Verans are an evolutionary dead end that needs to be pruned from the galaxy. The Terran Federation looked at the strategic situation, calculated the cost, and made their decision. The Veran worlds are too far from our core systems, too expensive to defend, not strategically valuable enough to risk human lives. They sent a strongly worded diplomatic protest to the Kresh and called it a day. The politicians made the smart choice, the logical choice, the choice that keeps human citizens safe and human economies stable. I made a different choice. Because Sera took a bullet for me when she was 10 years old, and I made her a promise that day in the hospital as she lay there bleeding. I promised that if she ever needed me, I would come. No matter what, no matter when, no matter the cost. She called in that promise 3 days ago. And Ironside Morrison never breaks his word. Part 1: The Debt. Let me take you back 20 years, back to when my knees worked and my hair wasn't white. Back to New Chicago, year 2247, 6 months after the end of the border wars. I was a colonel then, just like I am now, though back then it wasn't a retirement rank. I commanded the 3rd Expeditionary Regiment, the Devil Dogs, one of the Federation's elite rapid response units. We just finished 3 years of brutal combat against the Zarkan Confederacy in the Outer Rim. Good men and women died under my command. Some died well, some died badly, but they all died, and I carried every one of their names in my head. The war ended with a negotiated peace that satisfied nobody, and my regiment was rotated back to Earth for R&R and redeployment training. Most of my people went home to families. I went to New Chicago because I didn't have anywhere else to go. My wife had left me during the 2nd year of deployment, couldn't handle the stress of wondering if each communication blackout meant I was dead. My daughter stopped returning my messages around the same time. So I rented a small apartment in the city and spent my days trying to remember what peace felt like. That's when I met Sera. New Chicago had a massive refugee quarter, 3 square kilometers of converted industrial buildings housing aliens from a dozen different species. The Verans had the worst of it. They'd arrived 5 years earlier, fleeing the Kresh Hegemony's systematic extermination of their kind. The Federation had accepted them on humanitarian grounds, but humanity's charity only went so far. The Verans got basic housing, minimal food assistance, and the kind of jobs no human wanted. They were grateful for it. Anything was better than extinction, but it was a hard life. I used to walk through the refugee quarter sometimes, not for any official reason. I just needed to be around people who understood what it was like to have everything taken from them. The Verans got that in a way my civilian neighbors didn't. Sera's family ran a small food stall in the market district. Her mother cooked traditional Veran dishes that smelled alien but tasted surprisingly good. Her father worked construction during the day and helped at the stall in the evenings. Sera, their only child, was the family translator. She'd picked up English faster than her parents and helped them navigate human bureaucracy. She was a tiny thing, even for a Veran, maybe 4 feet tall, with the distinctive blue-gray skin and large eyes of her species. She wore human clothes that didn't quite fit right, and she had this way of watching everything with intense curiosity, like she was constantly trying to understand how this strange new world worked. I started eating at their stall most evenings. Sera would practice her English with me, asking questions about Earth and human culture. I'd answer what I could and she'd translate for her parents. They were kind people. They never asked about the war, never pressed me about the obvious signs of PTSD I was carrying. They just served me food and made me feel welcome. That's how it was for 2 months. Simple, peaceful, almost normal. Then Victor Salazar found me. Victor Salazar was a name I knew well. Former Federation military, dishonorably discharged for war crimes during the border wars. He'd been under my command briefly before I'd had him court-martialed for the execution of prisoners. The tribunal hadn't been able to make the charges stick. Salazar was too smart, knew how to cover his tracks, but the discharge kept him out of uniform. It didn't keep him out of the war business, though. He'd gone private sector, signing on with one of the mercenary companies that operated in the gray zones, where the Federation didn't want to send official forces. Word was he'd made a lot of money and a lot of enemies in equal measure. I hadn't thought about him in years. I should have. I was walking back to my apartment through the refugee quarter, evening settling over the city, when I felt the presence behind me. Combat instincts don't fade just because you're on leave. I knew I was being followed before I consciously registered the footsteps. I turned down a side alley, tactical decision, forced the confrontation in a controlled space, and waited. 3 figures emerged from the shadows. Salazar in the middle, 2 hired muscle flanking him, all armed, professional setup. "Colonel Morrison," Salazar said, and his voice still had that same cold edge I remembered. "Been a while." "Not long enough," I replied. My hand moved toward the sidearm I still carried out of habit. "What do you want, Salazar?" "Just a conversation," he said. "About old times, about justice, about the men you sent to die while you sat safe in a command center." I knew this script, seen it before. Salazar blamed me for something, maybe a friend who died under my command, maybe just the general unfairness of war, and he'd been festering that resentment for years. Now he was here for revenge, probably drunk enough or crazy enough to think killing a Federation colonel wouldn't have consequences. "Whatever you think I did," I said carefully, "this isn't the way to settle it. Walk away, Salazar, while you still can." He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Oh, I'm going to walk away, Colonel, you're not." His hand moved toward his weapon. My hand was already moving toward mine. Combat unfolds in fractions of seconds. Whoever moves first, moves fastest, usually wins. I never got the chance to find out if I was still fast enough. Because Sera came out of nowhere. I don't know what she was doing in that alley. Maybe she'd been following me, worried about the strange men shadowing the kind soldier who ate at her family's stall. Maybe she was just taking a shortcut home. It doesn't matter. What matters is that when Salazar pulled his weapon, when his finger tightened on the trigger, Sera threw herself between us. She was 10 years old. She weighed maybe 70 pounds. She had no combat training, no reason to sacrifice herself for a human soldier she barely knew. She did it anyway. The bullet hit her in the chest. Veran physiology is different from human. Their vital organs are arranged differently. But a bullet is a bullet. She went down hard, blood spreading across her shirt in a pattern that was too familiar from too many battlefields. Everything after that happened fast. I shot Salazar in the leg, dropped one of his men with a shot to the shoulder, and the third one ran. Local security arrived within minutes. Someone had heard the gunfire and called it in. Medics came. Sera was rushed to the hospital. Her parents arrived, screaming in their native language, reaching for their dying daughter. I stayed with her, rode in the ambulance, stood outside the operating room, refused to leave until I knew she'd survive. The doctors worked through the night. Touch and go, they said. She'd lost a lot of blood. The bullet had missed her primary heart but nicked an artery. If we'd been 2 minutes slower getting her to the hospital, she would have died. But she didn't die. She survived. And when she finally woke up 2 days later, tubes running from her small body to half a dozen machines, the first thing she did was ask if I was okay. A 10-year-old alien girl, lying in a hospital bed because she'd taken a bullet meant for me, and she asked if I was okay. I made her a promise that day, held her small hand in mine and promised that if she ever needed me, ever called for help, I would come. No matter what, no matter when, no matter the cost. She smiled, that universal expression that transcends species, and said in her accented English, "I know, that's what friends do." Part 2, 20 years later. 20 years is a long time. Long enough for wounds to heal and memories to fade. Long enough for a decorated colonel to retire, for a refugee child to grow into an adult, for the galaxy to forget about old debts and ancient promises. But some promises don't fade. Some debts never expire. I'd kept track of Sera over the years. Not intrusively. I wasn't her father or her commanding officer, but enough to know she was okay. She'd finished her education with honors, double majored in human xenology and galactic history. She'd gotten married to another Veran, had 2 children. She'd become an advocate for refugee rights, working with the Federation to improve conditions for displaced species. She'd built a good life from the ashes of what the Kresh had destroyed. We exchanged messages a few times a year, brief updates, casual conversation. She'd always end with the same phrase, "Thank you for the promise, Colonel. I hope I never have to call it in." I'd always reply, "Hope you don't either, but I'll be ready if you do." 3 days ago, my comm unit woke me at 300 hours. The message was flagged urgent, routed through 3 encrypted relays. Audio only. Sera's voice, but wrong, strained, desperate, afraid in a way I'd never heard before. "Colonel Morrison, it's Sera. The Kresh found us. They're coming. The Federation says they can't help, that it's not strategically viable, that they're sorry, but the Veran colonies are too far from core territories. They're going to let us die, Colonel. They're going to let the Kresh finish what they started 20 years ago." A pause, the sound of weapons fire in the background, screams. "I'm calling in the promise, Colonel. I know it's not fair. I know you're retired. I know I have no right to ask. But my children, God, my children are here. Everyone I love is here. And the Kresh are coming, and we have nowhere left to run." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, resigned. "I took a bullet for you once. I'm asking you to repay that debt. Please, Colonel, help us." The message ended. I sat there in my small apartment, hands shaking, though whether from age or anger I couldn't tell. The morning news feeds were already reporting it. Kresh Hegemony forces had launched a surprise attack on the Veran colony worlds. 3 planets, home to the last significant populations of Veran refugees. The Federation had issued a statement expressing deep concern and calling for diplomatic resolution. They'd sent strongly worded letters to the Kresh. They were not, under any circumstances, committing military forces to defend aliens who weren't Federation citizens on worlds that had no strategic value. It was the smart decision, the logical decision, the decision that kept human lives safe and human resources preserved. It was also abandonment, genocide by calculated indifference. The Federation might be able to live with that. I couldn't. I spent the next 6 hours making calls, tracking down old contacts, calling in favors that were decades overdue, waking up people who probably thought I was dead. By noon, I had 6 confirmations. Captain Sera, my former executive officer, 68 years old, retired to New Shanghai, running a security consulting firm. She'd been the best tactical officer in the regiment, could plan an insertion into hot zones like she was solving a puzzle. She said yes before I finished explaining the situation. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, my former communications specialist, 65 years old, retired to Mars Colony, teaching at the military academy. He'd kept our entire regiment connected across 3 light years during the border wars. When I asked if he could still crack military communications protocols, he laughed and said age hadn't made him stupid. Sergeant First Class Dmitry Volkov, my former combat engineer, 70 years old, retired to Luna, working on civilian construction projects. He'd once rigged an entire enemy fortification to explode using nothing but mining equipment and pure spite. He asked me what kind of demolitions work we'd need. I told him everything. He said he'd bring enough explosives to crack a planet. Corporal Jennifer Doc Martinez, my former medical officer, 66 years old, retired to Earth, running a clinic in the refugee quarter where she'd kept practicing medicine because she couldn't stop helping people. She'd saved more lives under combat conditions than any doctor I'd ever met. She said yes, then asked what our casualty projections looked like. I told her they were bad. She said she'd pack extra supplies. Chief Warrant Officer Kenji Sato, my former intelligence analyst, 69 years old, retired to Titan, working as a data security consultant. He'd predicted enemy movements so accurately during the war that some people thought he was psychic. He wasn't. He was just that good at pattern recognition. He said he'd already been monitoring the Kresh situation. He knew we'd need him before I called. And finally, Gunnery Sergeant Raymond "Gunny" Johnson, my former weapons specialist, 72 years old, retired to Earth, running a shooting range in Colorado. He could make a rifle sing and could train anyone to shoot like they'd been born with a weapon in their hands. He said he was too old for this shit. Then he said he'd be ready in 12 hours. 7 people. 7 old soldiers who should have known better. 7 fools who were about to throw away comfortable retirements to try to save people the Federation had already abandoned. We called ourselves the debt collectors. It seemed appropriate. Part 3. Assembling the team. We met at a private spaceport outside New Chicago, the kind of place that doesn't ask too many questions as long as the money's good. I'd liquidated most of my retirement savings to rent a light freighter, the Distant Thunder, a 20-year-old cargo hauler with modifications that definitely weren't legal. The captain was a woman named Tors who'd done questionable work during the border wars and didn't ask why 7 old people needed transport to a war zone. Payment up front, she'd said when I hired her, and if Federation patrol ships try to stop us, I'm dumping you in escape pods and running. No offense. None taken, I'd replied, just get us there. The team arrived one by one over the course of 6 hours. Chen came first, carrying a single duffel bag and wearing the same dangerous smile I remembered from the war. She looked good for 68. Military discipline kept her fit, and retirement hadn't softened her. "Been too long, Colonel," she said, shaking my hand with a grip that was still firm. "Though I was hoping the next time I saw you would involve less probability of death." "Where would be the fun in that?" I replied. Webb arrived next, looking professorial with gray hair and glasses that made him seem more teacher than soldier. He'd brought enough communication equipment to outfit a small army, all packed into storage containers that claimed to contain educational materials. "The Academy's going to wonder where all this went," he said cheerfully. "But I'm old. I'll blame dementia." Volkov came in carrying enough explosives to worry even Tors, who'd probably smuggled illegal weapons across half the galaxy. He was still massive at 70, muscle turning to bulk but still dangerous, with the kind of scars that told stories better than words. "I may have acquired some restricted materials," he said in his thick Russian accent. And by may have, I mean definitely did, but who's counting? Doc Martinez arrived with medical supplies that must have cost a fortune, her dark eyes sharp and assessing, as she looked each of us over like she was already cataloging our medical problems. You all look terrible, she announced. Good thing I brought plenty of medication, we'll need it. Sato came quietly, barely noticeable until he was there, carrying data storage units and looking like he'd stepped out of a business meeting rather than volunteering for a suicide mission. He had that same calm demeanor I remembered. Nothing rattled him, not even impending doom. The tactical situation is worse than the news reports suggest, he said without preamble. The Kresh have committed 3 full battle fleets. The Veran colony worlds have minimal defenses. Projected time until complete orbital bombardment, 72 hours. We need to move fast. And finally, Gunny arrived, moving with the careful precision of someone whose joints didn't work as well as they used to, but whose mind was still absolutely sharp. He'd brought enough weapons to outfit a platoon, all properly maintained and looking more cared for than most people's children. Figured we'd need proper gear, he said. The modern shit is too complicated. I brought classics, reliable like us. We stood there in the cargo bay of the distant Thunder, 7 old soldiers looking at each other and probably thinking the same thing. We were too old for this, too broken, too far past our prime. We should have been anywhere but here. But we were here anyway. Because a debt was a debt. I called the meeting to order in the freighter's common area. We had 72 hours to travel to the Veran colony worlds, assess the situation, and somehow delay or stop 3 Kresh battle fleets long enough for Federation reinforcements to arrive. Reinforcements that weren't coming because the Federation had already decided the Verans weren't worth saving. Let me be clear, I said, looking at each of them in turn. This is not a military operation. We have no official sanction. The Federation has not approved this action. If we're captured, we're on our own. If we're killed, there will be no honors, no memorial, no recognition. We will be 7 crazy old fools who died far from home for people who aren't our responsibility. Sounds about right, Chen said. The tactical situation is impossible, I continued. 3 Kresh battle fleets against whatever minimal defenses the Veran colonies have cobbled together. We're talking hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, against a civilian population with hunting rifles and improvised explosives. The Kresh don't negotiate. They don't take prisoners. They exterminate. So we're fucked, Gunny said. Tell us something we don't know. We're not trying to win, I said. We can't win. 7 people, even 7 extremely competent people, cannot defeat 3 battle fleets. What we can do is buy time, delay them, hurt them enough that they slow down, reconsider, maybe give the Federation time to change their minds about intervention. How long do we need to buy? Sato asked. Best case, a week. Enough time for public opinion to shift, for the media to make the Kresh attack into a story that politicians can't ignore. Worst case, as long as we can. Every hour we delay is another hour for Veran civilians to evacuate. And how exactly do 7 old farts delay 3 battle fleets? Volkov asked. By being smarter, meaner, and more unpredictable than they expect, Chen said, her tactical mind already working. The Kresh fight conventionally. They're used to overwhelming force, standard military doctrine. They won't expect asymmetric warfare from a handful of geriatric humans. Asymmetric warfare, Doc muttered. That's a polite way of saying we're going to cheat our asses off. Damn right we are, I said. Webb, can you get us into the Kresh communication networks? If they're using anything resembling standard protocols, yes, Webb replied. I'll need time to analyze their encryption, but Kresh systems are known for being powerful but inflexible. I can probably spoof command codes, send false orders, generally make their life miserable. Volkov, what can you do about their logistics? The big Russian grinned. Everything needs fuel, Colonel. Ships, vehicles, personnel. Disrupt their supply lines, destroy their depots, and those fancy battle fleets become very expensive paperweights very quickly. Sato, I need intelligence. Kresh fleet positions, defensive capabilities, command structures, everything. Already working on it, Sato said. The Kresh are arrogant. They're not hiding their movements because they don't think they need to. I'll have detailed tactical analysis within 12 hours. Gunny, weapons, and training. We're going to need to arm Veran civilians and teach them to fight. Fast. My specialty, Gunny said. Though training civilians in a war zone is always a clusterfuck. They'll panic, make mistakes, get themselves killed. Better than dying without fighting back, I said. Doc, medical support, for us and for the Verans. This is going to get bloody. Doc nodded grimly. I'll set up triage stations, save who I can. But Colonel, you need to be realistic. We're looking at mass casualties. I can't work miracles. Do your best, that's all I've ever asked. I looked around at my assembled team. 7 old soldiers, volunteering for a suicide mission to repay a debt to a species most humans barely knew existed. Last chance to walk away, I said quietly. No judgment, no shame. You've all earned your retirements. You don't owe anyone anything. Except you do, Chen said. That girl took a bullet for you, Colonel. That makes this our debt too. We were your people, your responsibility. That means your debts are our debts. She was 10 years old, Webb added. 10 years old, and she threw herself in front of a bullet to save a stranger. If that's not worth fighting for, what is? Besides, Volkov said cheerfully, I was getting bored with retirement. Building civilian structures is terrible. No one appreciates good explosions anymore. The others nodded agreement. 7 old fools committed to the cause. All right then, I said, let's go collect a debt. Part 4, The Journey. The journey to the Veran colony worlds took 3 days at maximum burn. Tours pushed the distant thunder hard, probably harder than the ship was designed for, and we spent those days planning and preparing. Sato had access to intelligence sources that probably weren't legal. He'd kept contacts from his time in military intelligence, people who owed him favors or shared his distaste for genocide. He fed us real-time updates on the Kresh advance. They're being methodical, he reported during our first strategy session. Textbook invasion protocol. They've established orbital superiority over all 3 colony worlds. Ground forces are conducting systematic sweeps, sector by sector. They're not rushing. They want to make sure they don't miss anyone. How much time do the colonists have? I asked. The Kresh are operating on a 10-day timetable for complete extermination, Sato said flatly. They've already processed the first colony world, population Zeta 7, 200,000 Verans, gone. They're moving to the second world now, population Gamma 3, 400,000 Verans. If they maintain their current pace, they'll reach the main colony, population Alpha 1, in 72 hours. Alpha 1 is where Sera's family is, I said quietly. I know, Colonel. Population there is 800,000. Largest concentration of Verans outside their lost homeworld. If the Kresh take Alpha 1, the Veran species is effectively extinct. The weight of that statement settled over the room. Extinction. Not defeat, not occupation, but complete erasure of an entire species. Because they'd fled genocide once and made the mistake of thinking the galaxy would protect them. We can't save them all, Chen said quietly. We need to accept that. Zeta 7 is already gone. Gamma 3 is probably lost too. Our best chance is Alpha 1. We focus everything there. Make the Kresh pay such a high price that they pause, reconsider, maybe buy enough time for someone to intervene. The Federation, Webb asked skeptically. Public pressure, Chen said. If the media makes this into a big enough story, if human citizens see Veran children being murdered, politicians will be forced to act. It's not ideal, but it's the only play we have. So we need to create a spectacle, I said, something the galaxy can't ignore. Something heroic and doomed, Doc said dryly. That's our specialty. We spent the journey preparing in our own ways. Webb worked on breaking Kresh encryption, muttering about outdated protocols and military stupidity. Volkov maintained his explosives, humming Russian folk songs while he calibrated detonators that could level buildings. Sato compiled tactical data, building computer models of every possible scenario, most of which ended with us dead but had varying degrees of success in the buying time category. Doc inventoried medical supplies and probably calculated how many people she could save versus how many would die. Gunny cleaned weapons with the meditative focus of someone for whom violence was a form of prayer. And Chen planned. She was the tactical genius of our group, the one who could look at an impossible situation and find the single thread that might lead to survival. I'd relied on her during the border wars more times than I could count, and she'd never let me down. We need to think asymmetric, she said, staring at holographic displays of the Veran colony worlds. The Kresh have overwhelming force. They have better ships, better weapons, better logistics. Everything about this is weighted in their favor. So how do we fight them? I asked. We don't, we frustrate them. She zoomed in on Alpha 1, the main colony world. The Kresh are expecting minimal resistance, panicked civilians, maybe some improvised defenses. They're not expecting organized opposition, and they're definitely not expecting human involvement. We're not exactly an army, I pointed out. No, but we represent human military doctrine, human tactics, human unpredictability. She smiled that dangerous smile. The Kresh fight honorably according to their cultural codes. They announce their presence. They give warnings. They follow rules of engagement that they consider civilized. And humans? Humans cheat, Chen said simply. We lie, we sabotage, we attack supply lines instead of armies. We make them paranoid, make them second-guess every decision. We turn their strength, their rigid military doctrine, into a weakness. Guerrilla warfare, I said. Guerrilla warfare fought by old soldiers who have nothing to lose and everything to prove, Chen confirmed. We teach the Verans to fight dirty. We hit the Kresh where they don't expect it. We make them afraid to leave their ships because they don't know where we'll strike next. That could work, Sato said, looking up from his tactical displays. The Kresh have limited ground forces for mopping up operations. They're relying on orbital superiority and shock troops. If we can neutralize their ground presence, force them to commit more resources, slow their timetable. They might give up, Volkov finished, or at least pause long enough for someone to notice the genocide happening. It's our best chance, Chen said, maybe our only chance. On the second day of the journey, I recorded a message. Not to the Federation. They'd already made their position clear. Not to the media. They just call us vigilantes or terrorists, depending on their political leanings. To Sera. This is Colonel James Morrison, I said into the recorder, feeling awkward talking to a screen. I received your message. I'm coming. We're coming, my old unit, the people I trust most in the galaxy. We're not an army. We're 7 old soldiers who should know better. But we made you a promise 20 years ago and we're going to keep it. I paused, thinking about what to say next. I want you to know that we understand the odds. We know what we're walking into. We know the Kresh are going to kill us eventually. But that's okay. We've lived long lives. We've fought our wars. If we're going to die, we might as well die doing something that matters. Another pause. 20 years ago, you took a bullet for me. You were 10 years old and you threw yourself between me and an assassin without hesitation. You barely knew me. I was just another human soldier, nothing special. But you saved my life anyway. My voice roughened slightly. Now it's my turn. I can't promise we'll save everyone. I can't promise we'll win. But I promise we'll fight. We'll buy you time. We'll hurt the Kresh badly enough that they'll remember humanity, and maybe, just maybe, we'll give your people a chance to survive." I ended the recording and sent it through encrypted channels. It would reach her before we arrived, probably the last communication I'd ever send to anyone. That night, measured by ship's clock, since there was no night in deep space, I couldn't sleep. Old warrior's insomnia, combined with the knowledge that I was leading 6 good people to their deaths. Doc found me in the common area, staring out the viewport at the stars streaming by. "Can't sleep?" she asked, settling into a chair beside me. "Thinking too much," I admitted. "About the mission. About whether I have the right to ask this of all of you. You're here because of my debt, my promise, but you're all risking your lives for it." Doc was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You remember Martinez?" I did. Private First Class Elena Martinez, Doc's younger sister, killed during the border wars when a Zarkin bomber struck her transport. Doc had been devastated. "After Elena died," Doc continued, "I was angry. At the Zarkin, at the Federation for starting the war, at you for being her commanding officer. I blamed everyone. And then I realized something. Elena died doing what she believed in. She wasn't forced to enlist. She wasn't conscripted. She chose to serve because she believed the Federation was worth defending." "Where are you going with this?" I asked quietly. "We're all here by choice, Colonel, not because we owe you, not because we're following orders, but because we believe some things are worth dying for. That girl who took a bullet for you, she believed in protecting others. That's worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary." "We're too old for this," I said. "Maybe," Doc agreed. "But we're also exactly the right people for this. We've lived long enough to understand what matters. We've seen enough death to know that some causes are worth the price. And we're old enough not to care what the Federation or the media or anyone else thinks about our choices." She stood up, patted my shoulder. "Get some sleep, Colonel. We're going to need you sharp." Part 5, Arrival. We dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Alpha 1 system with all stealth systems active. Tor's was good. She'd modified the distant thunder with military-grade dampeners that cost more than the ship itself. We registered as a faint gravitational anomaly at best, just another piece of space debris in a system full of them. "Kresh battle fleet is in high orbit," Sato reported, studying sensor data. "Flagship is the Crimson Testament, a dreadnought-class vessel with enough firepower to glass the planet from orbit. They have 2 escort carriers, 6 heavy cruisers, and approximately 30 support vessels. Ground forces appear to be conducting systematic sweeps on the southern continent." "What about Veran defenses?" I asked. "Minimal. Some civilian craft converted to fighters, a handful of ground-based anti-air batteries. They're not equipped for this level of assault." Sato's voice was flat, but I could hear the anger underneath. "The Kresh aren't even bothering with sophisticated tactics. They're just overwhelming everything with brute force. Time until they reach the civilian population centers. 48 hours at current pace, maybe less if they accelerate. 48 hours. 2 days to organize a resistance, train civilians, and somehow delay a military force that outgunned us by orders of magnitude. Tors, I said, get us to the surface. Somewhere away from Kresh sensor sweeps. We need to make contact with Veran resistance." "If there is a resistance," Tors muttered, "most species just run when the Kresh show up." "Then we'll teach them to fight," Gunny said. We landed in a remote valley on Alpha 1's northern continent, far from the Kresh ground operations. The planet was beautiful, temperate climate, forested mountains, crystalline rivers. It looked like paradise. Hard to believe it was about to become a graveyard. Sera met us at the landing site. I almost didn't recognize her. 20 years changes everyone, but Sera had grown from a small child into a formidable woman. She was taller now, about 5.5 feet, with the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades fighting for her people's rights. Her blue-gray skin had deepened with age, and there were stress lines around her large eyes that spoke of recent sleepless nights. But when she saw me, her face transformed with the same warm smile I remembered from 20 years ago. "Colonel Morrison," she said, and her English was flawless now without any trace of accent. "You came." "I made a promise," I said simply. She moved forward and did something that surprised me. She hugged me. Not a formal greeting, but a genuine embrace. Verans weren't typically physically demonstrative with non-family, but she held on tight, and I felt her shoulders shake slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for remembering. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being stupid enough to come when everyone else abandoned us." "We're good at stupid," I said, patting her back awkwardly. "Let me introduce you to my team." I went through the introductions. Sera shook hands with each of them, thanking them personally for coming. When she got to Doc, she paused. "You're the medical officer." "That's right," Doc said. "Then you should know we have injured, hundreds of them. The Kresh bombed 3 settlements yesterday. Our medical facilities are overwhelmed. If you can help." "Show me where," Doc said immediately. "That's what I'm here for." Sera's gratitude was visible. Then she turned back to me, her expression hardening into something more tactical. "We need to talk strategy, Colonel. The situation is worse than your intelligence probably suggested." We gathered in what passed for a command center, a hastily converted warehouse in a small Veran settlement called New Haven. It was packed with refugees, families clutching whatever possessions they'd managed to grab before fleeing the Kresh advance. Children cried. Adults spoke in hushed, terrified voices. The smell of fear and desperation was thick enough to taste. Sera brought us to a back room where a handful of Veran leaders had assembled. They looked at us with expressions mixing hope and skepticism. 7 old humans claiming they could help when the entire Federation had refused. "These are the regional coordinators," Sera explained. "This is Tavan, our militia commander, Kella, our chief engineer, Drex, our logistics coordinator, and Myra, our civilian evacuation director." Tavan was a male Veran, powerfully built by their species standards, with scars that suggested he'd seen combat before. He looked at us with obvious doubt. "No offense to the Colonel or his people," Tavan said, "but 7 elderly humans are not going to stop the Kresh. We appreciate the gesture, but perhaps your time would be better spent helping with evacuations." "We're not here to stop the Kresh," Chen said bluntly. "We're here to delay them, buy you time, maybe hurt them badly enough that they reconsider their timetable or that the Federation reconsiders their abandonment." "You're here to die heroically and hope it makes good press," Tavan said flatly. "I respect the courage, but we need practical help, not martyrs." "Then let's be practical," I said. "How many fighters do you have?" "Fighters?" Tavan laughed bitterly. "Colonel, we're refugees, civilians. We have hunting rifles and improvised explosives. Against Kresh battle armor and air support, we might as well be throwing rocks." "How many?" I repeated. Tavan sighed. 5,000 maybe, if we count everyone willing to hold a weapon. Most have no combat training. They're farmers, teachers, shopkeepers. We've been trying to teach them basic tactics, but there's no time. 5,000 is enough, Gunny said, if they're properly equipped and commanded. "With what weapons?" Kella asked. "We have limited manufacturing capability. We can't produce military-grade equipment." "You don't need to," Volkov said. "You have industrial capacity, yes. Mining equipment, construction materials." "Of course, but..." "Then you have weapons. Give me 24 hours and your mining explosives, and I'll show you how to turn civilian equipment into instruments of war." Drex, the logistics coordinator, leaned forward. "Even if we can arm our people, we can't fight the Kresh fleet. They control the orbital space. They can bombard any position we establish." "Which is why we won't establish fixed positions," Chen said. She activated a holographic display of Alpha 1. The Kresh are fighting conventionally. They're expecting conventional resistance. We're going to fight asymmetrically. Hit and run. Sabotage. Make them afraid to leave their ships without massive support. Guerrilla warfare, Tavan said slowly, like the human resistance movements in your historical records. Exactly like that, I confirmed. We can't win a straight fight, so we won't fight straight. We'll make this planet hell for them. Make every kilometer they advance cost blood and time. Make them so paranoid about ambushes that they slow down, commit more resources, make mistakes. And while we're doing that, Myra said, we evacuate civilians. Get them off-world before the Kresh can reach them. How many ships do you have? I asked. Not enough, Myra said quietly. Maybe 200 civilian transports, capable of carrying 50,000 people total. We have 800,000 civilians on this planet. Even if we had time for multiple trips, we don't have the fuel or the safe destinations. The math was brutal. Even in the best-case scenario, we could save maybe 10% of the population. The rest would have to hide, fight, or die. Then we focus on children, Doc said firmly. Evacuation priority goes to kids under 15. Get the next generation off-world. Preserve the species' future. Sera's face showed pain at that calculation, deciding who lived and who died based on age, but she nodded. I'll coordinate with the family groups. It won't be easy. No parent wants to send their child away without them. No parent wants their child exterminated either, Doc said bluntly. This is triage on a planetary scale. We save who we can and accept that we can't save everyone. The meeting continued for 3 hours, hashing out details of resistance, evacuation, and communication. By the end, we had the skeleton of a plan. Webb would tap into Kresh communications, providing intelligence on their movements and sowing confusion with false orders. Volkov would train Veran engineers in improvised weapons manufacturing and sabotage techniques. Gunny would establish training camps for the militia, teaching accelerated combat courses to civilians who'd never fired a weapon. Chen would coordinate tactical operations, positioning resistance cells where they could do maximum damage with minimum risk. Sato would run intelligence analysis, predicting Kresh movements and identifying vulnerability points in their logistics. Doc would establish medical facilities and train Veran medics in combat trauma care. And I would command the overall operation, coordinating our various efforts and trying to keep 7 old humans and 5,000 desperate Verans alive long enough to make a difference. It was an impossible mission, but then again, so was a 10-year-old throwing herself in front of a bullet. We had 48 hours before the Kresh reached the civilian centers. Time to get to work. Part 6, Preparing for War. The next 2 days were a blur of activity that would have exhausted me even 20 years ago. At 73, with knees that complained with every step and a back that felt like someone had replaced my spine with broken glass, it was agony. But I'd been in agony before. Pain was just another condition to work through. Gunny established his training camp in a mountain valley 20 kilometers from New Haven. 5,000 Verans showed up, more than Tavan had estimated. Some were young adults, barely out of adolescence. Others were older than me, grandparents with eyes full of determination and hands that shook with fear and age. All of them were terrified. None of them backed down. Listen up, Gunny's voice carried across the valley, amplified by portable speakers Webb had rigged up. I'm Gunnery Sergeant Johnson. I've been teaching people to kill other people for 50 years. I'm very good at it. Over the next 48 hours, I'm going to teach you 3 things: how to shoot, how to move, and how to not die stupidly. He paused, looking at the assembled crowd. I'm not going to lie to you. Most of you are going to die anyway. The Kresh are better trained, better equipped, and more experienced. But every Kresh soldier you kill is one less hunting your families. Every position you hold is time your children have to evacuate. Every ambush you survive is a message to the galaxy that the Veran people will not go quietly into extinction. He raised one of the rifles we'd brought, old military surplus, reliable and simple. This is your new best friend. Learn to love it. Learn to maintain it. Learn to use it so instinctively that you can reload in the dark while running for your life, because you will be running for your life. Often. The training was brutal. Gunny didn't have time to be gentle or encouraging. He drilled them relentlessly. How to sight a target, how to control breathing, how to squeeze a trigger instead of jerking it, how to move through terrain without silhouetting themselves, how to communicate with hand signals when sound would get them killed, how to apply tourniquets and chest seals because medical evacuation might not be possible. I watched him work and remembered why he'd been the best weapons instructor in the regiment. He was harsh, demanding, sometimes cruel, but he was effective. By the end of the first day, the Verans were hitting targets at 100 meters. By the end of the second day, they were moving in coordinated fire teams and performing basic small unit tactics. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was better than nothing. Volkov's operation was simultaneously impressive and terrifying. He'd commandeered a mining facility and turned it into a weapons factory that would have given Federation safety inspectors heart attacks. Mining explosives are beautiful things, he explained to a group of Veran engineers, handling containers of industrial explosives with the casual confidence of someone who'd been blowing things up for decades. Very stable, very powerful, and you have lots of them. We're going to turn them into improvised mines, shaped charges, and remote detonators. He demonstrated, assembling a mine from mining explosives, salvaged electronics, and what looked like spare parts from a farming vehicle. The Veran engineers watched with a mixture of fascination and horror. Place these along the Kresh advance routes, Volkov continued. Hide them well. When a Kresh armored transport passes over, trigger the detonator. The blast will punch through the bottom armor. It's their weak point. Vehicle disabled, crew dead or disoriented, easy targets for follow-up ambush. But mining explosives aren't designed for anti-personnel use, one of the engineers protested. The blast radius is unpredictable. We could kill our own people. Yes, Volkov agreed cheerfully. Which is why you maintain proper spacing and use spotters. War is not safe. Explosives are not toys, but the Kresh are coming whether you're ready or not. Better to have dangerous weapons than no weapons at all. Over 2 days, Volkov and the Veran engineers produced over 3,000 improvised mines, 500 shaped charges for destroying Kresh equipment, and enough remote detonators to turn every major road into a potential death trap. He also taught them how to use industrial equipment as weapons, mining lasers as anti-personnel devices, construction vehicles as improvised tanks, or haulers as mobile bombs. Russians learned much during Great Patriotic War, he told me when I inspected his work. How to fight when you have nothing, how to turn desperation into weapon, how to make invaders pay for every meter of ground. Kresh will learn same lesson. Webb's contribution was less visible but equally important. He'd set up a communication intercept station in a cave system, surrounded by equipment that hummed with electronic activity. The Kresh use quantum-encrypted military channels, he explained, showing me scrolling lines of code that meant nothing to me. Supposedly unbreakable, except they're using encryption protocols that were state-of-the-art 30 years ago. I cracked them in 6 hours. What are you doing with the access? I asked. Everything I can think of, Webb said with a grin. I'm intercepting their communications, troop movements, logistics schedules, command decisions. I'm feeding false intelligence into their network, reports of Veran resistance in areas where there's nothing, making them waste resources investigating ghosts. I'm spoofing command codes to send conflicting orders, creating confusion in their chain of command. He pulled up a display showing Kresh fleet communications. Best part, they don't know I'm in their system. They think their communications are secure. Every decision they make based on compromised intelligence helps us. How long until they figure it out? I asked. Hard to say. A week, maybe less if they have decent counterintelligence. But by then, hopefully we've bought enough time for it not to matter. Chen's tactical planning was the glue holding our chaotic resistance together. She divided Alpha 1 into sectors, assigned resistance cells to each sector, and coordinated their activities to maximize impact while minimizing risk. The key is unpredictability, she explained, showing me holographic battle maps. The Kresh are following a methodical sweep pattern, north to south, clearing each sector completely before moving to the next. We're going to disrupt that pattern. Hit them in sectors they think they've already cleared. Attack their logistics in areas they consider secure. Make them realize nowhere is safe. She'd identified choke points, places where geography forced Kresh forces into predictable routes. Valley passes, river crossings, mountain roads. Each choke point had a resistance cell assigned, with orders to ambush, mine, and harass any Kresh forces that passed through. We're not trying to destroy them, Chen emphasized. We're trying to slow them. Every ambush that makes them cautious, every mine that makes them sweep roads before advancing, every false intelligence report that makes them investigate empty areas, all of it buys time. What's our casualty projection? I asked quietly. Chen's expression hardened. 70% casualties within the first week, higher if the Kresh adjust their tactics, lower if we get lucky. 70%. Out of 5,000 fighters, we'd lose 3,500, and that was optimistic. The Verans know the odds, Chen said, reading my expression. They volunteered anyway, that counts for something. Doc's medical operation was set up in a network of caves that provided protection from orbital bombardment. She'd recruited every Veran with medical training and was running crash courses in combat trauma care. The primary killers in combat are hemorrhage, tension pneumothorax, and airway obstruction, she lectured to her students. You have approximately 3 to 5 minutes to address these issues before the patient dies. That means you need to work fast, work efficiently, and accept that you can't save everyone. She demonstrated on a training dummy, her movements precise despite her age. Hemorrhage control, apply tourniquet proximal to the wound. Don't worry about being gentle, pain means they're alive. Tension pneumothorax, needle decompression in the second intercostal space. Airway obstruction, establish surgical airway if necessary. The Veran medical students watched with wide eyes. They were used to treating accidents and illnesses, not combat wounds. You're going to see terrible things, Doc said quietly. Burns, amputations, pediatric trauma, your friends and family coming in with injuries that you can't fix. You're going to want to break down, to quit, to hide. Don't. Your people need you to be strong when everything is falling apart. One of the students, a young Veran female barely into adulthood, raised her hand. How do you deal with it, the death, the failure, knowing you can't save them all? Doc was quiet for a moment. You save who you can. You accept that medicine isn't magic. You do your best and you learn to live with the rest. She paused. And you remember that every life you save is a victory against the people trying to exterminate your species. That helps. Sato's intelligence analysis was providing real-time tactical advantages that kept our resistance one step ahead of the Kresh. The Kresh operate on strict schedules, he explained, showing me pattern analysis of their movements. They clear each sector in 72-hour cycles, deploy ground forces, establish security perimeter, conduct sweeps, eliminate resistance, move to next sector. Very efficient, very predictable. Which we can exploit, I said. Exactly. If we know their schedule, we know when and where they'll be vulnerable. Supply convoys arrive every 48 hours. Command staff rotates every 12 hours. Air support operates on predictable patrol patterns. He highlighted areas on the map. These are their weak points. Times when they're between shifts, when supply lines are extended, when command structure is transitioning. And you're feeding Chen this intelligence. Every 6 hours, updated with new data from Webb's intercepts and my predictive modeling. The Kresh don't know we're reading their mail. Every decision we make is based on perfect intelligence, while every decision they make is based on compromised data. It won't last, but for now, it's the closest thing we have to a force multiplier. On the evening of the second day, I gathered everyone, my team, the Veran resistance leaders, Sera, for a final briefing before the Kresh reached the civilian centers. Tomorrow they come, I said simply. Everything we've built, everything we've trained for gets tested. Some of you will die, many of you will die, but you'll die buying time for your people to escape. You'll die sending a message to the galaxy that the Veran species will not be exterminated without a fight. I looked around the room at faces, human and Veran, that showed fear and determination in equal measure. 20 years ago, a 10-year-old girl threw herself in front of a bullet to save a stranger. She didn't think about consequences or politics or strategic value. She saw someone in danger and she acted. That's what we're doing tomorrow. We're acting because it's right, because lives matter, because genocide is unacceptable even when it's strategically inconvenient for the Federation. Sera was crying now, not hiding it, and several other Verans were too. I'm proud to fight alongside all of you, I said. Humanity's best and the Veran resistance. Tomorrow we show the Kresh what happens when you threaten people who refuse to quit. Tomorrow we show the galaxy that some debts are worth dying to repay. Gunny stood up, raised his rifle. For the Verans. For the Verans, the room echoed back. Tomorrow the war began. Tonight we prepared to die. Part 7, the first strike. The Kresh came at dawn. 3 armored columns, advancing along the main access roads toward New Haven and the civilian population centers beyond. Each column consisted of approximately 200 soldiers, supported by armored transports, air support, and mobile artillery. Standard Kresh doctrine, overwhelming force applied methodically to eliminate all resistance. They weren't expecting us. Chen had positioned the first resistance cell, 50 Verans under Tavan's command, in the mountain past 3 kilometers north of New Haven. It was perfect ambush terrain. Narrow road carved through steep hillsides, limited visibility around corners, nowhere for heavy vehicles to maneuver off the main route. Volkov had seeded the road with mines. Webb had intercepted the Kresh advance timing and route. Sato had predicted their formation and vulnerable points. Gunny had trained the Verans to hold their fire until they saw the whites of their eyes, or whatever the Veran equivalent of that phrase was. At 5:47 hours local time, the lead Kresh armored transport rolled over the first mine. The explosion was spectacular. Mining explosives designed to fragment rock turned the bottom of the armored transport into shrapnel. The vehicle flipped, rolled, crashed into the ravine wall. Soldiers inside died instantly or crawled out injured, disoriented, perfect targets. The Veran resistance opened fire. 50 rifles firing in coordinated volleys, just like Gunny had trained them. The Kresh troops, caught in the kill zone, tried to deploy defensive formations. But they were in a narrow pass with limited cover, taking fire from elevated positions on both sides, and their command vehicle had just been destroyed. Military wisdom says that ambushes succeed through surprise, violence of action, and rapid withdrawal. Chen's plan followed that wisdom perfectly. The Verans fired for 90 seconds, enough to inflict casualties and create chaos, then withdrew through pre-planned escape routes before the Kresh could organize a response. By the time Kresh air support arrived, the Verans were gone, melted into the mountain terrain they knew intimately. First contact. 1 armored transport destroyed, estimated 40 Kresh casualties, 0 Veran losses. It wasn't a battle, it was a message. The second column ran into the same problem 30 minutes later in a different pass. This time the Verans used shaped charges to destroy 2 vehicles and remote detonators to collapse part of the road, trapping the column in a killing zone. Another 90-second ambush, another withdrawal before the Kresh could respond. The third column learned from the first 2. They deployed scouts, swept the road for mines, moved more cautiously. It cost them time, exactly what we wanted, but they avoided the ambushes until they reached the river crossing. Volkov had spent 2 days rigging the bridge with enough explosives to drop it into the river. The Kresh engineers detected the charges and stopped to clear them. That's when 100 Verans opened fire from concealed positions in the forest on both sides of the river. This time the Kresh were ready. They deployed heavy weapons, called in air support, established defensive perimeter. The firefight lasted 10 minutes, much longer than our hit-and-run doctrine suggested, and we paid for it. 17 Verans died in that engagement. 23 were wounded. But they held long enough for Volkov to remotely detonate the charges anyway. The bridge dropped into the river, taking 2 Kresh vehicles with it. The third column's advance was stopped dead, forced to find another crossing point or wait for engineering support. 17 Veran lives bought 6 hours of delay. The math was brutal, but it was working. I monitored the battles from the command center Chen had established in the cave system. Multiple holographic displays showed troop movements, communication intercepts, casualty reports. Webb's station hummed beside me, feeding false intelligence into the Kresh network. Sato updated his tactical models in real time, predicting the next Kresh moves. "They're adapting faster than expected," Chen said, studying the displays. "After 3 ambushes, they've changed doctrine, moving slower, more cautiously, sweeping every road, every bridge, every choke point." "Which buys us time," I pointed out. "Yes, but it also means our ambushes are less effective. They're expecting them now. And Colonel," she pulled up casualty reports, "we lost 17 in the 3rd engagement. If we maintain that casualty rate, we'll be combat ineffective within a week." "Then we adjust tactics," I said. "Hit softer targets. Go after supply lines instead of combat columns. Make them spread their forces to protect logistics." "Already coordinating that," Chen confirmed. "I have 3 cells moving to attack their rear echelon. Medical supplies, ammunition depots, command posts in areas they think are secure." The holographic display updated, showing Veran resistance cells moving into position behind Kresh lines. Webb's intercepts showed Kresh commanders increasingly frustrated by attacks coming from areas they'd already cleared. "They're starting to realize they're not fighting a conventional resistance," Sato observed. "Communication intercepts show confusion about our tactics, questions about whether they're facing trained military advisors." "Good," I said. "Let them worry. Worried commanders make mistakes." Doc's medical station was overwhelmed by the afternoon of the first day. The wounded came in waves, Verans with gunshot wounds, burns, shrapnel injuries. Some walked in under their own power. Others were carried by friends who were crying, begging Doc to save them. She worked with mechanical efficiency, triaging patients with the cold calculus of combat medicine. Immediate, delayed, minimal, expectant. The expectant category, patients too injured to save with available resources, was growing. "I need more supplies," Doc reported over the comm. "More blood, more antibiotics, more surgical equipment. And I need more trained personnel. My Veran medics are good, but they're not ready for this volume of trauma." "We're working on supply drops," I said. "Tors is running materials through the blockade when she can. But Doc, you need to accept." "Don't tell me to accept losses, Colonel," Doc snapped. "I've been accepting losses for 50 years. These are children, shopkeepers, teachers. They're not soldiers, but they're dying like soldiers, and I will save every single one I can." Her transmission cut off. She had work to do. By the end of the first day, we'd conducted 14 ambushes, destroyed 8 Kresh vehicles, inflicted an estimated 300 casualties, and delayed their advance by 18 hours. We'd lost 43 Verans killed and 70 wounded. The math was still in our favor, trading 43 Veran militia for 300 Kresh soldiers and 18 hours of delay. But the math didn't care about names or families, or the fact that each of those 43 had people who loved them. That night I attended the memorial service. The Verans held it in an underground chamber, safely away from potential orbital bombardment. They'd arranged their dead in rows, bodies wrapped in white cloth according to their customs. Family members stood beside them, touching the cloth gently, saying goodbye in their lilting language. Sera stood at the front, leading the service. Her voice was steady, but her colors, the subtle emotional indicators Verans displayed through skin pigmentation, showed grief. "We honor those who fell today," she said in Veran, then repeated in English for our benefit. "They died defending their families. They died buying time for evacuations. They died sending a message to the galaxy that the Veran people will not surrender to extinction." She named each of the fallen, said something personal about them, their family, their dreams, what they'd left behind. When she finished, she looked directly at me. "They died because of a promise made 20 years ago, because one human soldier couldn't stand by while someone else suffered, because Colonel Morrison believed a Veran child's life was worth saving, and because he keeps his promises." The assembled Verans turned to look at me, hundreds of them packed into the underground chamber. I saw gratitude in their faces, also expectation. They were counting on me to lead them through this, to make their sacrifices meaningful. I hoped I was worthy of that faith. Part 8: The Long Week. The fighting continued for 7 days. 7 days of ambushes and firefights and desperate retreats. 7 days of mounting casualties and shrinking resistance cells. 7 days of buying time 1 hour, 1 minute, 1 second at a time. The Kresh adapted. They stopped using predictable routes. They swept for mines more carefully. They deployed more air support, more heavy weapons, more reconnaissance drones. They learned that the Veran resistance wasn't a disorganized mob but a coordinated force with military training and support. They started looking for whoever was providing that support. On the 3rd day, a Kresh patrol discovered one of Webb's remote relay stations. They traced the communications back toward our command center. We had to evacuate, collapsing the cave entrances behind us with Volkov's explosives. We lost equipment, data, precious time resetting operations in a new location. Webb was furious. "They're getting smarter, deploying better counterintelligence. I can still intercept their communications, but I can't spoof orders anymore. They've updated their authentication protocols." On the 4th day, the Kresh deployed hunter-killer teams specifically tasked with finding and eliminating resistance leadership. They started offering rewards for information about the human advisors. Some Verans, desperate or frightened, probably took those offers. We began operating under the assumption that operational security was compromised. Chen adapted our tactics: smaller cells, more decentralized operations, less coordination, more autonomy for local commanders. It reduced our effectiveness but made us harder to eliminate systematically. On the 5th day, Doc ran out of blood for transfusions. Veran blood types didn't directly correspond to human types, and we hadn't had time to establish a donation system. She started making impossible decisions about which patients got the limited supplies. Some died because there simply weren't enough resources to save them. I found her that night, sitting alone in the medical station, staring at her hands. "I'm a doctor," she said quietly. "I'm supposed to save lives, but I'm choosing who lives and who dies based on blood inventory and triage categories. How is that medicine?" "It's war," I said, "and you're saving everyone you can." It's not enough, it's never enough. On the 6th day, Gunny was wounded. He'd been leading a training session with new resistance recruits when a Kresh patrol ambushed the position. He'd held them off long enough for the recruits to escape, killing 3 Kresh soldiers in close combat with nothing but his sidearm and sheer stubbornness. But he took a round through the shoulder, shattered his clavicle, destroyed nerves and muscle. Doc operated on him in a field station with minimal anesthetic and questionable sterile conditions. He survived, but his right arm was permanently damaged. The man who'd taught thousands of people to shoot couldn't hold a rifle anymore. "Well," he said when I visited him in recovery, his voice tight with pain and medication, "guess I'm down to one-armed operations. Good thing I'm ambidextrous." "You're done, Gunny," I said firmly. "You've done your part. Rest, recover." "Fuck that, sir," he said with the casual disrespect of someone who'd earned the right. "These kids still need training. I can teach them one-armed. Might even make me a better instructor, forces me to focus on technique instead of strength." He was back training recruits the next day, his arm in a sling, showing them how to shoot left-handed while his right arm hung useless. On the 7th day, we got news from Tors. She'd been running supply missions through the Kresh blockade, dodging patrol ships and automated defense systems. Her last run had been successful. She dropped medical supplies and ammunition in 3 locations, but her ship had taken damage. The Distant Thunder's engines were failing, her stealth systems compromised, her hull patched together with emergency repairs. "I can make maybe 2 more runs," she reported. "After that, this ship's going to fall apart or the Kresh are going to catch me. Your call, Colonel." "Focus on evacuation," I said. "Get civilians off-world. Kids first, like we discussed." "Roger that. And Colonel, you all are either the bravest or stupidest people I've ever met, probably both." "Definitely both," I agreed. By the end of the 7th day, our situation was deteriorating rapidly. We'd started with 5,000 Veran fighters. We were down to 3,000 combat-effective personnel. Casualties, wounds, exhaustion, all taking their toll. The resistance cells were smaller, less coordinated, increasingly desperate. But we'd also achieved our objective. We delayed the Kresh advance by 6 full days. 6 days for evacuations. 6 days for children to be shipped off-world. 6 days for the galaxy to notice the genocide happening on Alpha 1. And notice they did. Sato showed me the media reports coming from Federation space. Every major news network was covering the situation on Alpha 1. Footage of Kresh orbital bombardments, interviews with Veran refugees, stories about the mysterious human advisors helping the resistance. "Public opinion is shifting," Sato said. "Human citizens are demanding Federation intervention. Protests at government buildings across a dozen worlds. Politicians are feeling pressure." "Will it matter?" I asked. "Unknown. The Federation military is 3 days away at maximum speed. The question is whether public pressure will force the government to commit forces before the Verans are exterminated." 3 days. We needed to survive 3 more days. Given our current casualty rate, that seemed unlikely. That night, I called a meeting with my team and the Veran leadership. We gathered in our new command center, a bunker system the Verans had constructed for mining operations, now converted to military use. "We've bought the time we promised," I said without preamble. 6 days. The evacuations are ongoing. Tors and other pilots have gotten approximately 40,000 civilians off-world, mostly children. The media coverage is forcing the Federation to reconsider intervention. We've achieved our strategic objectives. "But," Chen prompted, reading my tone. "But the Kresh are going to reach the civilian centers in 48 hours, maybe less. When they do, the real massacre begins. Everything we've done will only have delayed the inevitable unless help arrives." "Federation reinforcements are 3 days away," Tavan said. We can't hold for 3 more days. We don't have the personnel, the supplies, or the defensive positions. Then we change the equation, Volkov said. We stop trying to hold them off and start trying to hurt them badly enough that they pause. What did you have in mind? I asked. Volkov smiled that dangerous smile I'd learned to both trust and fear. The Kresh flagship, the Crimson Testament, it's their command center, their coordination hub, their symbol of power. It's sitting in high orbit, thinking it's safe because we don't have space capability. You want to attack a Dreadnought-class warship, Chen said slowly. With what exactly? With what we have, Volkov said. Explosives, determination, and the element of surprise. The Kresh don't think we can reach their flagship. They don't think we'd be crazy enough to try. That's their mistake. That's suicide, Tavan said flatly. Yes, Volkov agreed. But dramatic, memorable suicide that will dominate media coverage and force Federation response. And possibly successful suicide that cripples Kresh command structure and buys days instead of hours. I looked around the table. Chen was nodding slowly, her tactical mind already working through possibilities. Sato was accessing data, calculating probabilities. Doc looked skeptical but not dismissive. Gunny, his arm still in a sling, was grinning like Christmas had come early. You're all actually considering this, Sera said, her voice caught between disbelief and hope. You want to hijack a ship and ram it into a Kresh dreadnought. Not ram, Volkov corrected. Infiltrate. The Kresh use automated cargo transports for resupply. Webb can spoof the identification codes, make one of those transports appear legitimate. We board it with enough explosives to matter, dock with the Crimson Testament under false credentials, and detonate inside their hangar bay. The Crimson Testament has shields, point defense systems, security protocols. One of the Veran engineers protested. You can't just waltz onto a military flagship. Which is why we use their own supply chain against them, Webb said, clearly already working the problem. Their cargo transports are semi-autonomous, cleared through automated systems. If I can duplicate the authentication codes, the transport will be waved through as a routine resupply mission. By the time they realize something's wrong, we're already docked. And then what? Sera asked. You blow up the hangar bay, that might damage the ship but it won't destroy it. No, Sato said quietly, pulling up schematics of Kresh dreadnought-class vessels. But the hangar bay is adjacent to the main reactor containment. A sufficiently large explosion in the hangar, combined with shaped charges placed against the containment walls. He ran calculations. Approximately 37% chance of catastrophic reactor failure. 98% chance of severe damage that renders the ship combat ineffective. 37%, Doc repeated. Those aren't great odds. Better than the 0% chance we have if we do nothing, I said. And even if we only damage the ship instead of destroying it, we accomplish the mission objectives. We create a spectacle the galaxy can't ignore. We prove the Verans are still fighting. We buy time. And you all die, Sera said, looking directly at me. Every single person on that ship dies. That's not buying time, Colonel, that's just revenge. No, I said quietly, it's repaying a debt. You took a bullet for me 20 years ago. Now I'm taking a bullet for you. That's what friends do, remember. Sera's colors shifted through patterns I'd learned meant emotional distress. I didn't save your life so you could throw it away 20 years later. You didn't save my life so I could sit safe while your species gets exterminated, I countered. Sera, we always knew this was a one-way mission. The only question was how much good we could do before the end. This is how we do the most good. She was crying now. Verans cried differently than humans, their tears a luminescent blue, but she nodded. Then I'm coming with you. No, I said immediately. Yes, she said firmly. This is my people's fight, my planet, my debt to repay. You came because I called. Now I'm coming with you because you need every person you can get, and I'm a decent shot and I'm not letting you die alone. Your children, I started, are on a transport ship headed to Federation space where they'll be safe, Sera interrupted. My husband is with them. I said my goodbyes yesterday. I'm not asking permission, Colonel. I'm informing you that I'm part of this mission. I looked at the others. Chen shrugged. She's right, we need every person, and she's earned the right to fight for her people. Fine, I said, but you follow orders, no heroics. Says the man planning to ram a spaceship into a dreadnought, Sera said dryly. Part 9, the final mission. We had 24 hours to prepare. Webb worked on cracking the Kresh cargo transport authentication codes. It was harder than their military communications. The cargo system used physical security keys in addition to digital encryption. But he was Webb, and if anyone could make a ship lie about its identity, it was him. I need physical access to a cargo transport, he reported after 12 hours of work. I can duplicate the digital credentials remotely, but the physical security key requires me to be on site to clone it. Which means we need to hijack a cargo transport, Chen said. She pulled up tracking data from Kresh Logistics. There's one scheduled to dock at their forward supply depot in 6 hours. Small escort, maybe 15 soldiers. We hit it, take the ship, Webb clones the security keys, and we're set. 15 soldiers, Gunny said. We can manage that. The assault on the supply depot was textbook. Chen planned it. Tavan's militia executed it. Gunny supervised from the rear, one-armed but still deadly with a sidearm. Volkov provided explosives for breaching charges. We hit the depot at dawn, when shift changes meant minimal security awareness. The Kresh never saw us coming. 15 soldiers died in under 3 minutes. We secured the cargo transport, Webb cloned the security keys, and we were out before Kresh reinforcements could respond. One Veran died in the assault, a young male named Veran who'd been in Gunny's first training class. He took a burst of fire to the chest protecting a wounded comrade, died instantly, according to Doc's examination. We added him to the growing list of names, another debt the Kresh would pay for. The cargo transport was perfect for our needs, large enough to carry 20 people and Volkov's explosives, automated enough that Webb could program it to dock without manual piloting, boring enough that the Kresh wouldn't look too closely at it. We loaded it with everything Volkov could manufacture in 24 hours, mining explosives, shaped charges, thermal detonators cobbled together from mining lasers, remote detonators with redundant backups in case the primary failed, enough destructive power to level a city block, all packed into cargo containers that looked like routine supply shipments. This is beautiful, Volkov said, surveying his work. Like Russian nesting dolls, but each doll is bomb. How stable is all this? Doc asked nervously. Very stable, Volkov assured her, until we detonate it, then very unstable, but you'll be dead before you notice, so don't worry. That's not comforting, Doc muttered. The team for the final mission was chosen not through volunteering, everyone volunteered, but through cold, tactical calculation. We needed people with specific skills, people who were still combat effective, people who understood they weren't coming back. The final roster. Colonel James Morrison, Commander, because it was my debt to repay. Captain Sera Chen, Tactical Officer, because if anyone could navigate a hostile warship, it was her. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Communications Specialist, because we needed him to maintain the spoofed credentials all the way to docking. Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Johnson, Weapons Specialist, because even one-armed, he was the best shot we had. Chief Warrant Officer Kenji Sato, Intelligence Analyst, because his ability to predict enemy movements might keep us alive long enough to complete the mission. Sergeant First Class Dmitry Volkov, Demolitions Expert, because someone needed to arm and detonate the explosives, and Volkov was the only one who truly understood his own chaotic creations. And Sera, because she'd earned the right to fight for her people, and because I owed her that much. Doc and the remaining resistance would stay on Alpha 1, continuing to delay the Kresh ground forces and evacuate civilians. Tavan would command the militia in our absence. Tors would continue running supplies and evacuations as long as her ship held together. "This is goodbye then," Doc said quietly as we prepared to board the transport. "You're not coming back from this." "No," I agreed, "but the Verans have a chance because of what we're doing. That's worth it." She hugged me fierce, quick, professional. "Don't make it hurt," she said. "When the end comes, make it fast." "That's the plan," I assured her. One by one, my team boarded the transport. Chen, moving with her usual efficiency. Webb, carrying portable equipment in case we needed to do on-the-fly hacking. Sato, calm and collected as always. Gunny, gripping his rifle left-handed, refusing to admit his injury mattered. Volkov, grinning like a maniac because he was about to blow something up on a spectacular scale. And Sera pausing at the ramp to look back at her planet, her home, the place she'd fought so hard to protect. "Thank you," she said to me quietly, "for coming, for keeping your promise, for giving us a chance." "Thank you for taking that bullet," I replied. "Changed my life, gave it meaning I'd lost somewhere in the war." She smiled through her tears. "Friends don't let friends face extinction alone." "No," I agreed, "they don't." We boarded the transport. The ramp closed behind us. Webb initiated the launch sequence. The distant thunder had brought us to Alpha 1. A hijacked cargo transport would take us to the Crimson Testament. One way, no return trip. 7 old humans and 1 young Veran, about to assault a warship. The galaxy would remember this, one way or another. Part 10, Crimson Testament. The flight to the Crimson Testament took 4 hours. 4 hours of sitting in a cargo hold, surrounded by enough explosives to atomize us all, pretending we were a routine supply shipment while our hearts hammered and our hands shook. Webb monitored the communications, ready to respond to any challenges. But the Kresh security was exactly as arrogant as we'd hoped. An automated cargo transport with proper credentials wasn't worth a second glance. We were waved through the outer defensive perimeter, then the inner perimeter, then the final approach to the flagship itself. "We're being scanned," Webb reported. "Standard cargo inspection. The system's looking for weapons, explosives, biological agents." "And?" Chen asked tensely. "And Volkov's containers are shielded well enough that they read as mining equipment and industrial supplies. The system is flagging some anomalies but within acceptable parameters for civilian cargo." He paused. "We're cleared for docking. Bay 12, hangar deck level 3. "Just like that," Gunny said. "We just waltz right in." "Just like that," Webb confirmed. "The Kresh don't believe anyone would be crazy enough to attack a dreadnought from inside. Their security is focused on external threats." "Their mistake," Volkov said cheerfully. The transport shuddered as docking clamps engaged. We felt the pressure equalization, heard the automated systems cycling through post-docking procedures. Then the cargo ramp lowered, and we got our first look at the interior of a Kresh warship. It was massive. The hangar bay could have held 50 cargo transports like ours. The ceiling was 30 meters high, supported by structural beams that looked more architectural than functional. The Kresh built their military vessels to be imposing, not just effective. The walls were a dark crimson metal that gave the ship its name, etched with designs that might have been decorative or might have been some form of Kresh writing. And there were soldiers, dozens of them, moving cargo, performing maintenance, standing guard, all of them armed, all of them between us and our target. "Phase 1, Chen said quietly over our comm system. "Look like we belong here, move with purpose, no hesitation. Webb, your lead, act like you're a civilian contractor annoyed about military inefficiency. Everyone else follow his lead." We disembarked from the transport, Webb in front, carrying a datapad and projecting irritation. The rest of us following, dressed in generic worker coveralls that could pass for civilian contractors from a distance. Volkov and Sato were pushing anti-grav sleds loaded with the explosive-filled containers. A Kresh officer approached, young, officious, probably annoyed about processing another civilian supply delivery. Manifest, the officer demanded in heavily accented but serviceable standard. Webb handed over a datapad with falsified documentation. Mining equipment and industrial supplies for the ground operations. Your logistics department ordered this 3 days ago. We're already behind schedule because of your security protocols, so if you want to delay us further. Proceed to storage area D7, the officer interrupted, waving dismissively. Leave the cargo there. A deck crew will inventory it later. Fine, Webb said, projecting exactly the right amount of civilian annoyance at military bureaucracy. D7, where is that exactly? The officer pointed toward a corridor. 2 levels down, 3rd junction, turn left. It's marked. Of course it is, Webb muttered. He turned to us. Come on, people. Let's get this done so we can get off this death trap and back to actual civilization. We moved toward the corridor, pushing the anti-grav sleds, trying to look bored and annoyed rather than terrified and determined. The Kresh soldiers around us paid minimal attention. We were just more civilian contractors, a minor irritation in their military operation. We made it to the storage area without challenge. Phase 2, Chen said once we were alone in the storage bay. Volkov, how long to arm the charges? 15 minutes if we're careful, 10 if we're fast, 5 if we're lucky, Volkov replied, already unpacking containers. We need to place shaped charges against the wall adjacent to the reactor containment, position the mining explosives for maximum blast effect, and rig the remote detonators with sufficient redundancy. We'll secure the perimeter, I said. Gunny Sato watch the corridor, Sera help Volkov. Chen, Webb, figure out how we get from here to the reactor containment. The next 12 minutes were the longest of my life. Volkov worked with practiced efficiency, assembling his explosives with the confidence of someone who'd been doing this for 50 years. Sera assisted, following his instructions precisely. The charges took shape, shaped explosive panels against the wall, mining explosives stacked for maximum effect, remote detonators with backup triggers. Chen and Webb studied schematics they'd pulled from the Kresh computer systems, unauthorized access. But by this point, we were already committed to crimes that made illegal computer access seem trivial. Reactor containment is directly on the other side of this wall, Chen reported. 2 meters of reinforced hull plating. Volkov, can your shaped charges penetrate that? Maybe, Volkov said. Depends on the alloy composition and the placement. If we're lucky, the charges breach the containment. If we're not lucky, we just make a very large explosion that damages the hangar bay. Either way, we hurt them, I said. That's the mission. Gunny's voice crackled over the comm. We've got movement in the corridor. 3 soldiers, routine patrol. They're going to pass by this storage bay in about 90 seconds. Volkov, I asked. Need 3 more minutes to finish the detonators, he replied, not looking up from his work. We don't have 3 minutes, Gunny said. 60 seconds. I made the decision. Ambush them, quiet if possible, Chen Sato with me, Gunny stay with Volkov. We positioned ourselves just inside the storage bay door. The Kresh patrol approached, 3 soldiers relaxed, not expecting trouble on their own flagship. They walked past the door. Chen moved first, quick, silent, a blade to the throat of the nearest soldier. He went down without a sound. Sato took the second one, some kind of martial arts technique I didn't recognize but was brutally effective. The soldier dropped. The third one started to raise his weapon, started to shout. I shot him. Suppressed sidearm, subsonic rounds, but still loud in the metal corridor. The soldier went down. "Clear," I said, "but that shot's going to draw attention. We need to finish this now." We dragged the bodies into the storage bay. Volkov was placing the last detonator. "Done," he announced. "The charges are armed. We have remote detonation capability with 2 backup triggers. The explosion will occur approximately 5 seconds after we activate the trigger, giving us no time whatsoever to reach minimum safe distance." "Because there is no safe distance on a warship," Chen said. "Exactly," Volkov agreed cheerfully. "Phase 3, I said. "Exfiltration. We get as far from this bay as possible before we detonate. Head for the docking area, try to commandeer a small craft." "There is no Phase 3, Colonel," Sato interrupted quietly. "I've been running probability calculations since we boarded. The likelihood of us successfully fleeing a Dreadnought-class vessel after committing sabotage is approximately 0.3%. The Kresh will seal the ship the moment they detect the breach. We'll be trapped." "Then we fight our way to a shuttle bay," Gunny said. "Go down swinging." "Or we accept that we came here to complete a mission, not to escape it," Chen said. She looked at each of us. "We knew this was one way. Let's not pretend otherwise now." Sera spoke up, her voice steady despite the fear I could see in her eyes. "You all came here because of a debt to me. I won't let you die alone because of that debt. We detonate the charges now, together." "There might be escape pods," Webb offered. "Small craft designed for evacuation, if we could reach one before the explosion." Alarms started blaring. "Or not," Webb finished. Part 11, the end. The storage bay door burst open. Kresh soldiers poured in, 10, 15 more behind them. We'd been discovered. Whether because of the missing patrol or because security had finally flagged our presence, it didn't matter. The firefight was instant and brutal. Gunny opened up with his rifle, one-armed but still accurate. 2 Kresh soldiers went down. Chen and I returned fire, using the cargo containers as cover. Sato threw something, flashbang grenade, blinding and disorienting the next wave. Sera fired her weapon with surprising accuracy, hitting a Kresh officer in the center mass. But there were too many of them, and more were coming. "Volkov," I shouted over the gunfire. Blow it now." "Charges need 5 seconds to arm after activation," he shouted back, pulling out the detonator. 5 seconds from now, we all die." "Then make it count." Chen returned fire, dropping another Kresh soldier. "Webb, send the message. Let the galaxy know what happened here." Webb was already on his comm unit, broadcasting on all frequencies, military, civilian, media. His voice was calm despite the chaos around us. "This is Lieutenant Marcus Webb of the Terran Federation Exploration Fleet. We are aboard the Kresh flagship Crimson Testament. We are 7 human soldiers and 1 Veran civilian. We came to Alpha 1 because a promise was made 20 years ago that humans would protect those who protected us. We came because the Federation abandoned the Verans to genocide. We came because some debts are worth dying to repay." A burst of fire struck near his position. He didn't flinch, just kept broadcasting. "In approximately 3 seconds, we will detonate sufficient explosives to cripple or destroy this vessel. We do this not out of hatred but out of necessity. We do this to buy time for Veran evacuations. We do this to send a message to the Kresh Hegemony. Genocide has a price. We do this to send a message to the Terran Federation. Your military might not save the innocent, but your soldiers will." Another burst of fire. Sera went down, hit in the leg, bleeding. Doc would have been furious at the wound placement, the arterial damage. But Doc was light years away, and there was no time for medical treatment now. "We are Colonel James Morrison, Captain Sera Chen, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Johnson, Chief Warrant Officer Kenji Sato, Sergeant First Class Dmitry Volkov, and Sera of the Veran people. Remember our names. Remember what we died for. Remember that 7 old soldiers and 1 brave Veran thought your lives were worth saving." Volkov activated the detonator. 5 seconds, he said calmly. It's been an honor serving with you all. 4 seconds. More Kresh soldiers poured into the storage bay. We fired back, knowing it was futile, doing it anyway because that's what soldiers do. 3 seconds. I looked at my team. Chen, still firing with mechanical precision. Gunny, laughing like a madman as he dropped Kresh soldiers one-handed. Sato, calm to the end, calculating our final moments with the same analytical mind that had served us so well. Webb, still broadcasting, still making sure the galaxy heard our message. 2 seconds. Sera pulled herself up on one leg, raised her weapon, fired at the Kresh soldiers who'd killed her people. For the Verans, she said. For the Verans, we all echoed. 1 second. I thought about that day 20 years ago. A small alien girl throwing herself in front of a bullet meant for me. I'd made her a promise then. I'd kept that promise. Some debts are worth dying to repay. 0. The explosion was. Epilogue 3 months later. The Crimson Testament didn't explode. Not completely. Volkov's charges breached the reactor containment, causing a cascade failure that rendered the ship's power systems critical. The dreadnought went dark, life support failed, weapons offline, propulsion dead. It became a floating hulk, not destroyed but combat ineffective, requiring months of repairs in a shipyard. And in those few seconds of confusion, before secondary explosions began ripping through the ship, before damage control teams could respond, 7 humans and 1 Veran did something impossible. We survived. Not by planning, not by skill, by sheer stupid luck. The explosion blew out a section of hull adjacent to the storage bay. Explosive decompression threw us into space. We should have died. Vacuum exposure, debris impact, 100 different ways for unprotected humans to die in space. But the Kresh had been loading emergency environment suits in that storage area. The explosion threw us through the breach along with a dozen emergency suits. Chen grabbed one. I grabbed one. By the time the secondary explosion started, we'd pulled suits onto ourselves and the others. Crude, badly fitted, but functional. We floated in the debris field, watching the Crimson Testament die its slow death, waiting for rescue or death, whichever came first. Rescue came first. Tors, in her battered distant thunder, had been monitoring all military frequencies. She'd heard Webb's broadcast. She'd seen the Crimson Testament go dark. And she'd done something even crazier than our assault on the dreadnought. She'd flown directly into the Kresh fleet to pull us out of the debris field. "You magnificent crazy bastards," she'd said when she pulled us into her cargo bay. "You actually did it. You actually crippled a Kresh dreadnought." We survived. Against all odds, against all probability, 7 old soldiers and 1 young Veran survived. And the galaxy had been watching. Webb's broadcast went viral, transmitted across 1,000 worlds, picked up by every news network, analyzed by every military strategist. The image of 7 elderly humans assaulting a dreadnought to protect an alien species captured the human imagination in a way that political speeches never could. Public pressure on the Terran Federation became overwhelming. Within 12 hours of our assault, the Federation committed 3 battle fleets to defend Alpha 1. Within 24 hours, they'd engaged the Kresh forces and driven them back. Within 48 hours, the genocide was stopped. Not prevented, thousands of Verans had already died, but stopped. The Kresh withdrew, citing unexpected resistance and strategic recalculation. They didn't admit that 7 old humans had scared them, but they withdrew. Alpha 1 survived, not intact, never intact, but alive. The colony would rebuild. The evacuated children would return. The Veran species would continue. Because a promise made 20 years ago was kept. 3 months later, I stood in front of a Federation review board. They'd debated court-martialing us. We'd operated without authorization. We'd stolen military equipment. We'd attacked a foreign military vessel. We'd violated approximately 40 different regulations and treaties. But public opinion made prosecution impossible. We were heroes, monuments to human courage and honor, the old soldiers who'd sacrificed everything to save an alien species. The review board settled for a formal reprimand, noted in our permanent records, meaningless given that we were already retired. "Colonel Morrison," the board chair said, "you put the Federation in an impossible position. You forced us to commit military resources to a conflict we decided was not strategically viable. You risked interstellar war. You could have gotten thousands of humans killed." "Yes, ma'am," I agreed. "And yet," she continued, her expression softening slightly, "you also demonstrated the values the Federation claims to uphold: protection of the innocent, opposition to genocide, honoring our debts to those who have helped us. You made us live up to our own ideals." She paused. "The review board has decided that no further action will be taken. You and your team are free to return to retirement, assuming you still want to retire." "I'm 73, ma'am," I said. "My knees don't work right, my back's shot. I take more medication than food. I'm definitely retired." "Good," she said, "because the Verans are petitioning for you to become their Federation ambassador. The position comes with diplomatic immunity, a generous salary, and the certainty that you'll spend the rest of your life navigating political minefields instead of actual minefields." "That sounds terrible," I said. "It does," she agreed. "Will you take it?" I thought about Sera, who was recovering from her leg wound, about the Verans who'd survived because we'd bought them time, about the children who'd been evacuated and would now grow up to rebuild their species, about a promise kept. "Yes, ma'am," I said, "I'll take it." The ceremony was held on Alpha 1, in New Haven, at the memorial they'd constructed for those who died defending the planet. 43 names from the first day, hundreds more from the week of fighting, thousands total, Verans and the few humans who'd helped them, each name carved into crystal that caught the light and reflected it in colors that looked like hope. Sera stood beside me, leaning on a cane, her leg still healing. Her children had returned from Federation space and were playing nearby with other Veran children, the next generation, saved because their parents had fought and died to buy them time. 20 years, Sera said quietly. From a bullet in New Chicago to this. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Never, I admitted. When you took that bullet, I just wanted you to survive. I didn't think about debts or promises or any of this. But you made the promise anyway, she said, and you kept it, even when it should have killed you. Some promises are worth keeping, I said. My team was scattered now. Chen had taken a position training Federation tactical officers, passing on lessons learned from our asymmetric warfare. Webb was teaching advanced communications at the academy, probably inspiring a generation of young officers to think creatively about impossible problems. Volkov had gone back to Luna, but his retirement now involved consulting for Federation special operations, teaching them his chaos. Doc had stayed on Alpha 1, running medical facilities and training Veran doctors. She'd found her purpose in healing the wounded, in rebuilding what war had destroyed. Gunny was with her, one-armed but still teaching Verans to shoot, still refusing to admit his age or injury mattered. Sato had returned to Titan but maintained connections with Veran intelligence services, helping them build defensive networks against future threats. We'd all survived. Against impossible odds, against every reasonable expectation, we'd survived. Colonel Morrison, a young Veran, approached, maybe 16, with the eager expression of someone about to ask a question they'd been rehearsing. Is it true you knew our champion when she was just a child? Champion? I looked at Sera, who colored slightly, embarrassment or pride hard to tell. They've started calling me that, she admitted. The Veran who brought human help, the champion who saved her people. You saved yourself, I said. We just bought you time. You honored a debt when the galaxy said to forget it, Sera corrected. That's what champions do. The young Veran looked between us. Will you tell me the story? About the bullet in New Chicago, about how humans and Verans became friends. I looked at Sera. She smiled, that same warm smile from 20 years ago, older now but no less genuine. It's a good story, I said to the young Veran. About a foolish old soldier and a brave young girl, about promises made and debts repaid, about how sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change entire worlds. Tell me, the young Veran said. So I did. I told the story of a 10-year-old alien girl who threw herself in front of a bullet to save a stranger. I told the story of a promise made in a hospital room, of 20 years passing, of a desperate call for help that 7 old soldiers couldn't ignore. I told the story of asymmetric warfare and impossible odds, of mining explosives and hijacked cargo ships, of a final assault on a dreadnought that should have killed us all. I told the story of debts repaid and promises kept. And as I told it, more Verans gathered to listen. Children who'd been evacuated, parents who'd fought in the resistance, survivors who remembered the week when 7 humans and 5,000 Verans held off an empire. They listened and they remembered and they understood. Some debts transcend species. Some promises are worth dying to keep. And sometimes 7 old soldiers who should know better can change the fate of an entire people. The veteran's promise was kept. The debt was repaid. And in the end, against all odds, we survived to tell the story. Closing. They say debt has no expiration date in the galaxy. That honor transcends species, time, and the slow decay of aging bodies. 20 years ago, a child saved a soldier's life. Last week, that soldier and his team saved an entire species. The Terran Federation now has formal diplomatic relations with the Veran people, trade agreements, mutual defense treaties, cultural exchange programs, all because one girl was brave and one old soldier kept his word. There's a statue now in New Haven on Alpha 1. 7 old humans and 1 young Veran standing together facing an unseen enemy. The plaque reads, "The debt collectors, they came when no one else would." I visit it sometimes when my knees allow and my back doesn't scream too loudly. I stand there and remember the ones who didn't make it, the 43 from the first day, the hundreds who fell in the week of fighting, the names on the memorial crystal. And I remember Sera, 10 years old, throwing herself in front of a bullet. Some debts are worth dying to repay. We got lucky, we survived. But we would have done it anyway. That's what the veteran's promise means. That's what friends do.